Alright guys, we are going to be reacting to why Russian cops don't shoot even when they shoot. Very interesting. We're going to simply jump in here and see what's going on. Let's go.
Look at this footage. A drunk man in an SUV is trying to escape from police somewhere in Russia. What happens in the next few seconds will clearly show the main difference between Russian and American police. After he miraculously doesn't hit anyone, he crashes into a fence. His car is immobilized. In a similar situation, American police officers would act very cautiously. They would take cover positions, keep their weapons ready, and start giving commands.
Let me see your hands! Let me see your hands!
What did the Russian cops do? They immediately ran to physically pull the driver out of the car and almost paid their lives. The driver unexpectedly had a knife in his hand. In the US, such a move would be deadly for the driver. In this situation, even after the officer pulled out his pistol, the suspect didn't drop his knife. It took one warning shot into the air for him to understand the seriousness of the situation and surrender. Yes, according to regulations, a Russian police officer must first fire a warning shot into the air. In the United States, this is prohibited in most departments and considered dangerous and unprofessional. Moreover, even if the suspect ignores such a threat, a Russian officer is unlikely to immediately shoot directly at the violator, even if he continues walking toward him with a knife. We'll figure out why Russian cops behave this way in just a minute. But first, let's look at a situation with a more tragic ending. An aggressive man with a knife exits an apartment building. The police officer orders him to drop the knife, after which you can hear the sound of the pistol safety being released. Then comes a specific threat to use the firearm. After the threats don't work, the officer fires a shot into the air to scare the man, but this only makes the situation worse. He pulls out a second knife. According to regulations, if after a warning shot the suspect continues to pose a threat, the officer still doesn't have the right to shoot at the torso. First, the officer will typically try to immobilize the suspect and shoot at his legs. Even in shooting classes in Russian police academies, they are taught to shoot specifically at the legs. This is exactly what the officer in the video does. Shooting at legs seems like a humane idea, but as we see here, it doesn't lead to success because hitting the legs of a moving person is no easy task. And we're not in a cowboy movie, so while the cop is aiming at the thigh, the attacker almost stabs his partner with a knife.
Bam.
Here, in a similar situation in the USA, an officer without hesitation uses extreme force as soon as an aggressive person has a knife in hand. In the United States, 1 in 4 police officers uses their firearm at least once during their career. In 2024, US police killed more than 1,300 people. In Russia, there were 1,300 people killed over the last 15 years. Moreover, the chance of being killed on the job for a police officer in the USA is 3 times higher than in Russia. There is another reason. Look at this graph. This is the crime rate in Moscow and Los Angeles. A typical workday for a Russian cop consists of domestic violence calls, noisy neighbors.
We have a lot of gang problems, man. And in those big cities, that's where a lot of the crime concentrates. So, makes sense.
And loud drunks on their windows. But the main reason for such strong differences is that 1 in 3 Americans owns a gun. Meanwhile, in Russia, you have to pass.
But not, see, this is misleading now. This is misleading. Because rarely is a gun owner a legal gun owner. I think 9 out of 10 of those incidents is from illegal guns.
A medical examination, see a psychiatrist, a narcologist, have an interview at the police station, buy a safe, wait for verification, pass an exam on weapons legislation, buy a smoothbore gun, wait 5 years, and then maybe they'll allow you to get a rifle.
Yeah, but that's not the problem that we have in the United States. This is a little misleading, this video. Yeah, this is a little misleading. That's not how it works. Again, 9 out of 10 of the murders by gun in the United States is committed by illegal guns. Right. And it all depends also in which state you're living. There's some states that are a little bit easier to get guns. There's others that are impossible to earn guns. So that's one thing.
Police officers in Russia simply aren't used to people having weapons. Moreover, if a Russian cop takes a weapon out of the holster, that's already a dozen reports and a bunch of problems with superiors. If they use the weapon, that's already hundreds of reports and almost guaranteed dismissal. And this will all happen even if the officer used the weapon appropriately for the situation. In other cases, prison, of course. That's why some might call the actions of Russian police something like diplomatic. However, in reality, diplomacy in dealing with aggressive people can often only make the situation worse.
Yeah.
Because if the violator doesn't follow a lawful order and doesn't receive a firm response, it always provokes even more aggressive behavior. Look at how this guy directly threatens the police.
Yeah,
There is
man.
zero
They healed any American officer like that. That dude is down.
reaction.
Заебать уж хуй сосать, сука! И чё, завтра ваши родственники будут на нашем месте? Твои родные скажут. И как будете вы вести? Как ты будешь вести? Я тебе знаю, как ты будешь вести? Как ты будешь тебя вести? Да нихуя, потому что ты пидорас!
It's completely obvious that this guy poses a danger to society at this moment. There are approximately 1,000 reasons to detain him, but it doesn't happen. It would seem there are more cops and they're pretty strong guys. Plus they're armed. What are they afraid of? An aggressive guy in a wrinkled shirt? No, they're afraid of what will happen afterward, after they use the force. Let's look at what happens to a police officer after using weapons or special means like a baton or handcuffs. Well, in America, an officer goes on paid administrative leave. During this leave, they're assigned a psychologist who will help them recover from the trauma, because killing a person in any case a trauma and shock for any psyche. Then there is a fair and detailed investigation of the incident. In the end, if the officer used the weapon justifiably, they're condemned and returned to duty. In Russia, no leave or psychological rehabilitation. An officer has to file hundreds of reports. Their actions are almost always subjected to intense scrutiny, and such incidents often end in dismissal and criminal charges, which further discourages the use of firearms even in dangerous situations. As a result, a Russian cop uses their weapon so rarely that sometimes they simply forget about it. Here's an example. Two police officers caught their colleague taking a bribe, but during the arrest, they didn't even confiscate his service weapon. Because of a bad mood, the arrested cop pulled out his gun and opened accurate aimed fire at his colleagues. The outcome of the story: one dead and one wounded. The moral of the story: if you are planning to really upset someone, first take away their gun. And although this is an isolated case, it vividly shows Russian cops' attitude toward weapons. But there are cases when Russian police use firearms much more often than cops in the US. Look, this chase very quickly turned into an action movie. During the chase, police first simply demanded the driver stop and then began threatening to shoot. By the way, spike strips are practically not used in Russia, only in exceptional cases like this one. Also, Russian police don't have special ramming vehicles like in America. In the US, any police officer can also call a helicopter for pursuit. Russian police don't have that option either. However, unlike American cops, Russian ones have the right to shoot at a vehicle, at the wheels or engine, which is what they started doing. After some time, the car was left on just the rims. At this moment, they started shooting at the car with a machine gun. The car was already on its last legs when one of the officers jumped up and tried to chase it, but the car was still faster. After 40 minutes from the start of the chase, the driver was finally subdued. One of the bullets went through the seat and hit him in the back, but the driver was so drunk that he refused medical help.
Не держу, уже падаешь.
Я не падаю. Могу ровно стоять.
Я тебя отпускаю, ты падаешь.
Давай.
Я не буду рисковать.
Despite the fact that police in different countries work in different conditions, they often find themselves in similar situations. And in such situations, an officer must decide what they'll use to solve the task: conversation, baton, taser, or firearm. This is called the force continuum, and the logic of such a choice is roughly the same in all countries. Both in Russia and the US, a police officer has the right to use the force at least one step more intense than the criminal, and may even skip several steps to have a tactical advantage. For example, if the suspect is acting aggressively, a cop can use a taser. But if you pull out a knife and walk toward an officer, they can shoot you to kill. However, in Russian police academies, much less time is devoted to weapons handling and shooting than in the US. 35 hours in Russia and 70 in the US. Sometimes this
And also, we're not taking into account culture. Culture is very important. You're handling with an almost homogeneous society. In the US, since we have more immigrants in the last couple of years, understandable. There's a lot of people that are gonna be into their groups, and then those little groups, they create, like, a lot of gangs, and now you have another component to deal with. So
lead to the fact that when a
so
Russian
basically,
police
not everybody's gonna understand the rules at the end of the day.
officer does use a weapon, it ends in catastrophe. Look, the cop is kicking a guy who is in fact isn't resisting at all. Then he decides to restrain the guy, but for some completely unknown reason, he also decides to pull out his service weapon and wreck the slide. During the further struggle, the cop accidentally pulls the trigger. This story made headlines across the entire country, but didn't cause a single protest or outrage. But it doesn't mean that in Russia people love Russian police and completely trust them. The intuitive desire of any citizen in Russia is, if you see a police officer, cross to the other side of the street just to be safe. Everything is aggravated by the fact that Russian police work like a commercial organization, where the main performance indicator is KPIs. That means there must be more fines, criminal cases, and sentences than last year. Otherwise, management will decide that the department is working poorly and will cut funding. Therefore, cases where a person discovers drugs in their pocket that they've never even seen before are very common in Russia. But if we are talking specifically about danger to life, then aggressively interacting with a Russian police officer is less dangerous than with an American one. You can push them, insult them, resist, and run away. Yes, for assault you can be imprisoned for a long time. And there was a high-profile case in Russia where during a protest, a person threw a plastic cup toward the police officer. Formally, this case was qualified as using violence against a government representative, and that's an article under which you can get real prison time. At the same time, you can quite imagine this real situation. In this footage, a bald-naked man got so angry that a police station employee was rude to him on the phone that he came to the station and beat up the police officers. In the US, he would already be full of lead, but in Russia, he calmly returned home. Of course, the next day, guests with assault rifles came to him, but he remained unharmed, and most importantly, alive. In the end, I want to show you this video. It has 4 million views and compares how Russian and American police behave. An American police officer spends a long time trying to convince a driver to give him documents.
Whatsoever?
I do, yeah. Yes,
Can I
sir.
get that from you, please?
I'd rather not. I'd rather not. 'Cause
I understand that you'd rather not, but I'm asking you to please provide me with that.
But I'd rather not. I'm not being charged by my anyway.
Not yet, you're not being charged. But you very well may be given this.
But what you're saying.
While in Russia, after the driver trapped the officer's hand with the window, the cop arrests him quite harshly.
Что вы делаете? Нет. Вы понимаете, что вы делаете? Вы понимаете, что вы делаете? Ну и что? Вы не имеете права влазить.
Damn. Yeah, that was kind of crazy. It's crazy, man.
Such videos create an illusion of contrast, but in reality, they compare different levels of escalation, not different countries. While in this footage there is a normal legal dispute without physical threat, in this footage there is a direct threat to the officer's life and health. If we swap the cops, we could assume that in this situation, things would have developed completely differently. And
I mean, it all depends, right? At that point, it all depends culturally, how they see things. In our case, we have developed a system where the rights is the main thing that you are always protecting. The rights. So they start having these arguments. Well, but in reality, if you don't have a suspicion to arrest somebody, I have the right not to provide the documents towards you. But I would not even play with that. Also, I have what we call the protection of the Fifth Amendment, which give me the right to not say anything if I don't want to. Because if I say something, it will be used against my will in a court and on a court of law. That's what they call the Miranda right. That's why they wrote the Miranda right, because they want to make sure that your Fifth Amendment right is being protected. And that has created a culture that sometimes, police officers do stop you and they're in the wrong. So you want to make sure that you know that, hey, we're doing things correctly here. Don't be trying to just do some weird stuff here. But again, in Russia is different. I mean, Russia has a different culture. Russia has something different. They have different crimes, I would say, different things to be dealing with. So it makes sense why certain things might be different over there. In our case, again, our problem is not legal guns. Our problem is illegal guns. The problem in the United States, not the people just own guns, and that's the problem. No, it's illegal guns. People can find illegal guns everywhere, and I guess in Russia it's the same problem. You know, you can find illegal guns easier. Also, in each state in the union, there's different processes to just own a gun. Some states like Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, even here in Wisconsin, it's easier to get a gun. But then you put that in contracts with California, New York, Illinois, right? And it's a little bit difficult, right? Thus, you have situations where people can get guns in those states rather quicker, and most of the time, it's not the case. But let me know what you guys see in the comment section below, guys. I will see you next one.